I'm a millionaire and disguised myself as a garbage man. I tested my son's fiancée. Her reaction was shocking. I was surprised by her attitude. I never imagined I would find myself in this position at 60 years old, standing here in my study, overlooking the sprawling gardens of my Newport mansion. I can't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. The reflection staring back at me from the window shows a man who's built an empire worth billions. Yet today, I feel powerless watching my only son, Alexander, potentially walking into what could be the biggest mistake of his life. 6 months ago, Alexander introduced us to Madison Taylor, a 25-year-old social media influencer with millions of followers and a modeling contract with several high-end fashion brands. The moment she walked through our doors, something felt off. Perhaps it was the calculated way her eyes scanned our home's grand foyer, or how her perfectly manicured fingers traced the antique furniture as if appraising each piece. "Dad, isn't she amazing?" Alexander had asked that night, his eyes shining with the kind of admiration that only young love can inspire. I nodded, forcing a smile while watching Madison charm everyone at the dinner table with stories about her charitable work and her rise to social media fame. But I've spent 4 decades building my technology company from nothing, learning to read people along the way. The subtle signs were there, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at my son, how her attention would drift whenever Alexander spoke about anything unrelated to our family's wealth or social connections. Rosa, our housekeeper of 30 years and more like family than employee, seems to share my concerns. I've caught her watching Madison with a troubled expression several times, though she's been unusually reluctant to share her thoughts. This morning, I overheard Madison speaking on the phone in the garden, her voice carrying through the open window. "Trust me, everything's going according to plan," she had said, her tone completely different from the sweet, caring voice she uses around Alexander. "Just a few more months and we'll never have to worry about money again." Those words have been echoing in my head all day. Now, watching Alexander excitedly plan their engagement party for next month, I know I have to act. I've protected my son from everything since he was born, and I won't stop now. But I need proof, concrete evidence that Madison isn't who she claims to be. That's why I've devised a plan. Tomorrow I'll begin my investigation, but not as Richard Montgomery, the tech billionaire everyone knows. No, I'll become someone Madison would never suspect, someone she'd consider beneath her notice. I've already arranged for a temporary job as a maintenance worker at Le Petit Jardin, the exclusive restaurant where she has lunch every Wednesday. The irony isn't lost on me. Here I am, a man who's been featured on the cover of Forbes planning to disguise myself as a janitor. But for Alexander, I'd do anything. I've already lost his mother. I won't lose him to someone who sees him as nothing more than a path to wealth and status. Rosa knocked on my study door, interrupting my thoughts. "Mr. Montgomery, your son is asking for you. They want to discuss wedding venues." I turned from the window, straightening my posture. "Thank you, Rosa, I'll be right there." But as she turned to leave, I noticed something in her expression, a flicker of conflict, perhaps even guilt. "Rosa, wait. Is there something you want to tell me about Madison?" She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with her apron, a nervous habit I've known for 3 decades. "Mr. Montgomery, She started, then stopped, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I can't. I made a promise." Before I could press further, she hurried away, leaving me with even more questions. What promise? To whom? The mystery surrounding Madison seemed to deepen with each passing day, and tomorrow's undercover operation couldn't come soon enough. As I headed downstairs to meet Alexander and his fiancée, I caught a glimpse of Madison through the living room doorway. She was taking selfies by the antique fireplace, her expression shifting effortlessly between poses, each one more artificial than the last. When she noticed me, her face transformed instantly into that perfect, practiced smile. "Richard, we were just talking about having the wedding at the Newport mansion. Wouldn't that be absolutely perfect?" I smiled back, matching her performance with one of my own. Tomorrow we'd see how genuine that lovely smile of hers really was when faced with someone she considered beneath her social station. Tomorrow the real Madison Taylor would begin to emerge. The next morning I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with the day's impending charade. As I stood before the mirror, methodically applying the theatrical makeup that would age me another decade, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of my situation. Here I was, Richard Montgomery, tech mogul, and one of the wealthiest men in America, preparing to masquerade as a janitor. The transformation was startling. Graying hair, wrinkles etched deeper, and a slight stoop to my posture. The man staring back at me from the mirror was a far cry from the titan of industry the world knew. I donned a worn uniform I'd procured from a costume shop, complete with a name tag reading Earl. As I slipped out of the mansion through a side entrance, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of our staff, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line. But then Alexander's face flashed in my mind, his trusting smile so reminiscent of his mother's, and I knew I had to see this through. Le Petit Jardin was already bustling when I arrived. The manager, an old acquaintance who owed me a favor, greeted me with a knowing nod. "Your supplies are in the back, Earl," he said loudly, playing along with our pre-arranged script. "Make sure you get to those restrooms first thing." I mumbled a gruff acknowledgement, keeping my head down as I shuffled past the immaculately dressed waitstaff. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have bought this entire restaurant chain with what amounted to pocket change, yet here I was, being ordered to clean toilets. For hours, I went about my duties, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the entrance. Just as I was beginning to think Madison might not show, she swept in, looking every bit the social media starlet in a designer sundress and oversized sunglasses. I watched from a distance as she was escorted to her usual table, her phone already out and recording a video for her followers. "Hey guys," she chirped, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "Just about to have lunch at my absolute favorite spot in Newport. The lobster bisque here is to die for." Gathering my cleaning supplies, I made my way towards her table, timing my approach to coincide with a lull in her incessant selfie-taking. As I neared, I deliberately caught my foot on the leg of an empty chair, sending my mop bucket clattering to the floor. Water splashed across the polished tiles, narrowly missing Madison's designer shoes. "Oh my God," she shrieked, leaping back. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy old man." I hunched my shoulders, affecting a trembling voice. "I'm so sorry, miss. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Please let me clean that up for you." Madison's face contorted with disgust as I knelt to mop up the spill. Just get away from me. Can't they hire competent staff in this place?" She turned to a nearby waiter. "I want him out of my sight. Now." The waiter, looking uncomfortable, tried to defuse the situation. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Taylor. We'll have this cleaned up immediately." As I continued to mop, keeping my head bowed, I listened to Madison's conversation with her lunch companion, a young woman I recognized as another social media influencer. "Can you believe this?" Madison hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. "If Alexander's father knew how they treated his future daughter-in-law here, he'd buy this place just to shut it down." Her friend giggled. "Well, once you're married, you could probably convince him to do just that." Madison's laugh was cold. "Oh, honey, once I'm married, I'll be able to do a lot more than that. The Montgomery fortune isn't going to spend itself." I felt my hands tighten around the mop handle. Every word confirmed my worst fears, yet I forced myself to remain in character, shuffling away with my bucket as Madison's attention returned to her phone. "Sorry about that, guys," she said, her voice once again sweet as honey as she addressed her followers. "Just a little accident, but everything's perfect now. Let me show you this amazing view." I retreated to the kitchen, my mind reeling. The mask Madison wore was impeccable. To the world, she was a charming, beautiful young woman living a fairy tale romance. But in those unguarded moments, I'd glimpsed the calculating opportunist beneath. As I leaned against the kitchen wall trying to process what I'd witnessed, I noticed one of the young waitresses looking at me curiously. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "That woman was terribly rude to you." "Don't take it to heart." I managed a small smile, touched by her kindness. "Thank you, my dear. I've seen her type before. They come and go, but kindness, that's what lasts." The girl smiled back before returning to her duties, leaving me to my thoughts. I had the evidence I'd come for, but it left me with a heavy heart. How could I show Alexander the truth without breaking his? As I prepared to leave, discarding my disguise in the employee restroom, I overheard Madison's voice one last time. She was on the phone, her tone hushed but excited. "It's all going according to plan," she said. "A few more weeks and we'll have everything we've ever wanted. Just imagine, babe, we'll never have to worry about money again." My blood ran cold. Babe? There was someone else involved in this scheme? I left Le Petit Jardin with more questions than answers, my mind already formulating the next phase of my investigation. One thing was clear. The stakes had just gotten higher and time was running out. I needed to uncover the full extent of Madison's deception before it was too late, before my son made a mistake that could cost him everything. As I drove home, my resolve strengthened. The next test would be more challenging, more revealing. I would uncover the truth no matter the cost to myself. For Alexander's sake, I had to. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. My mind was constantly torn between the gnawing worry over what I'd witnessed at Le Petit Jardin and the meticulous planning required for the upcoming charity gala. This event would be my next test for Madison, a more elaborate and revealing challenge than the restaurant encounter. I stood in my study, gazing out at the workers setting up tents and decorations on the sprawling lawn of our estate. The annual Montgomery Foundation Charity Gala was always a highlight of Newport's social calendar, but this year I had engineered some significant changes to the guest list. "Mr. Montgomery," Rosa's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, a stack of RSVPs in her hands. "The final guest list is ready for your approval." I nodded, taking the list from her. "Thank you, Rosa. And the special guests we discussed?" A flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossed Rosa's face before she composed herself. "They've all confirmed their attendance, sir." I scanned the list, noting the names of local community leaders, small business owners, and several families from the underprivileged neighborhoods our foundation supported. These were not the usual glitterati Madison would be expecting. "Excellent," I said, handing the list back to Rosa. "And Madison, has she asked any questions about the guest list?" Rosa shook her head. "No, sir. She's been busy with dress fittings and hair appointments all week." I couldn't help but notice the slight edge in Rosa's tone when she mentioned Madison. Once again, I was struck by the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. "Rosa," I began carefully, "I know you made a promise to someone, but if there's anything you think I should know about Madison, anything that could affect Alexander's happiness." Rosa's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought she might confide in me. But then she shook her head, her expression resolute. "I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery. I can't betray a confidence, but..." She hesitated, then continued. "I will say that sometimes things aren't as simple as they appear. Perhaps it's best to keep an open mind." Before I could press further, the sound of laughter drifted in from the hallway. Alexander and Madison appeared in the doorway, both looking flushed and excited. "Dad!" Alexander exclaimed. "You won't believe the surprise Madison has planned for the gala. She's invited some of her influencer friends to help promote the foundation's work. Isn't that amazing?" I forced a smile, noting the triumphant gleam in Madison's eyes. "That's very thoughtful of you, Madison. However, I'm afraid the guest list has already been finalized. We're focusing on a more community-oriented crowd this year." Madison's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Oh, of course, that's even better. I'm sure my followers would love to see me interacting with people from all walks of life. It'll be so inspiring." As they left, already chattering about Madison's gala outfit, I exchanged a knowing look with Rosa. The stage was set. Now we would see how Madison performed when the spotlight wasn't exactly to her liking. The night of the gala arrived, and I found myself greeting guests at the entrance to our illuminated gardens. The air was filled with the soft strains of a string quartet and the gentle murmur of conversation. I watched as Madison made her entrance, resplendent in a designer gown, her smile dazzling as camera flashes popped. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. When introduced to the owner of a small family-run bakery that our foundation had helped, her smile became fixed, her eyes darting around as if seeking a more suitable conversation partner. She seemed to physically recoil when a young man from our youth mentorship program enthusiastically shook her hand, leaving a slight smudge on her immaculate manicure. I observed her from across the room, noting how she would graciously pose for photos with our guests, but then immediately reach for a hand sanitizer the moment they walked away. Her discomfort was palpable, her usual poise strained under the weight of interacting with people she clearly viewed as beneath her. Alexander, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to Madison's discomfort, proudly introducing her to everyone as his fiancée. But I wasn't the only one noticing her behavior. I caught Rosa watching Madison with a mix of disappointment and, was that pity? As I made my way through the crowd, I overheard snippets of Madison's conversations. "Oh, how quaint," she said to a local artist showcasing his work. "I'm sure with a little professional guidance, you could really make something of yourself." To a group of teenagers from our scholarship program, she smiled condescendingly. "It's so wonderful that you have this opportunity. Not everyone can be born into privilege, after all." Each interaction further confirmed my suspicions, yet I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. Madison was revealing her true colors, yes, but at what cost to Alexander's heart? As the evening progressed, I noticed Madison becoming increasingly agitated, checking her phone frequently and glancing nervously towards the entrance. It was as if she was expecting someone who wasn't on our carefully curated guest list. Just as I was about to approach her, a commotion at the entrance caught everyone's attention. A man I didn't recognize was arguing with the security guards, insisting he had an invitation. Madison's face paled and she quickly excused herself, hurrying towards the disturbance. I followed discreetly, my heart racing. Something told me that the next few moments would be crucial. As I neared the entrance, I could hear Madison's hushed, frantic whispers. "What are you doing here? You can't be seen. We had a plan, remember?" The man's reply was too low for me to hear, but the tension in Madison's posture was unmistakable. Who was this man, and what plan were they referring to? As I watched this scene unfold, I realized that the gala had taken an unexpected turn. The truth I sought might be about to reveal itself, but at what cost? And was I prepared for what I might discover? The night was far from over, and I had a feeling that the real test for Madison, for Alexander, and for myself was only just beginning. The gala was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses and polite laughter, but my attention was entirely focused on the unfolding drama at the entrance. I edged closer, careful to remain out of sight, straining to hear the heated exchange between Madison and the mysterious intruder. "Jake, you need to leave. Now." Madison's voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the panic in her tone. "If Richard or Alexander see you here, everything we've worked for will be ruined." The man, Jake, grabbed her arm, his face a mask of desperation. "We need to accelerate the plan, Maddie. My creditors are breathing down my neck. I can't wait any longer." My mind raced. Plan, creditors. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than I had imagined. Before I could intervene, Alexander appeared, his face lighting up at the sight of Madison. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Who's your friend?" Madison's face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, fear, and then a plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Alex, this is an old friend from college. Jake, this is my fiancé, Alexander Montgomery." Jake's demeanor changed instantly, a charming smile replacing his previous scowl. He shook Alexander's hand enthusiastically. "Alexander, I've heard so much about you. Madison never stops talking about how wonderful you are." I watched the interaction from afar, my stomach churning. The ease with which both Madison and Jake slipped into their roles was chilling. They were practiced deceivers, and my son was their unsuspecting target. As Jake smoothly integrated himself into the party, I noticed him gravitating towards our wealthiest guests. He was charming, charismatic, and seemed to have an uncanny ability to ingratiate himself with everyone he met. But there was something familiar about his tactics, something that nagged at the back of my mind. I made my way to one of our security personnel, discreetly pointing out Jake. "Run a background check on that man," quietly. As I waited for the results, I kept a close eye on Jake and Madison. They were careful, but I caught the meaningful glances they exchanged across the room, the brief moments when their hands would touch as they passed each other. It was clear now. Jake wasn't just an accomplice. He was the real reason behind Madison's engagement to Alexander. My phone buzzed with a message from security. The information it contained made my blood run cold. Jake Thompson was a known con artist, wanted in 3 states for fraud and embezzlement. He had a history of targeting wealthy families through romantic entanglements. The pieces clicked into place. Madison wasn't working alone. She was the bait, the beautiful face to open doors that Jake would then exploit. My son was just a means to an end for them, a path to the Montgomery fortune. I knew I had to act fast, but I needed to be smart about it. A public confrontation could be disastrous, potentially pushing Alexander further into Madison's arms. No, this required a more delicate touch. As luck would have it, the opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Jake, emboldened by the ease with which he had infiltrated the party, was regaling a group of guests with tales of his supposed philanthropic work in developing countries. I approached the group, a friendly smile masking my true intentions. "That sounds fascinating, Mr. Thompson," Jake supplied smoothly. "Jake Thompson. Mr. Thompson," I continued. "I'm always interested in new philanthropic ventures. Perhaps you could tell us more about your organization? I'm sure everyone here would be interested in the details, registrations, financial reports, that sort of thing." I saw a flicker of panic in Jake's eyes, quickly masked. Of course. It's a relatively new venture, you understand. We're still in the process of finalizing some of the paperwork." "Oh, but surely you have some preliminary documentation," I pressed, my voice innocent, but my eyes locked on Jake's. After all, an experienced philanthropist like yourself would know the importance of transparency. The atmosphere in the group changed, subtle looks of suspicion replacing the previous admiration. Jake's confidence began to falter, his smooth facade cracking under the pressure of my questioning. Across the room, I saw Madison watching us, her face a mixture of fear and fury. She started to make her way towards us, but was intercepted by Alexander, who seemed oblivious to the mounting tension. "Perhaps," I said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "you could explain how your organization differs from the fraudulent scheme that a Jake Thompson was involved in last year in California. The resemblance is quite striking." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jake, whose charm had evaporated, replaced by a cornered, desperate look. Madison had frozen in place, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. I don't know what you're talking about," Jake stammered, but it was too late. The whispers had already started, the suspicious glances, the slow backing away of the other guests. Alexander, finally sensing that something was amiss, approached our group. "Dad, what's going on?" I turned to my son, my heart heavy. "Alexander, I think it's time we had a serious talk about your engagement." Madison, seeing the disaster unfolding, rushed to Jake's side. "It's not what you think," she pleaded, looking frantically between Alexander and me. "I can explain everything." But the damage was done, the masks had slipped, and the truth was laid bare for all to see. As security discreetly escorted Jake from the premises, I watched the myriad emotions play across my son's face: confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization of betrayal. The gala had become a turning point, but not in the way any of us had expected. As I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of exposed lies and shattered illusions, I knew that the real challenge was only just beginning. How would Alexander cope with this betrayal? And what other secrets would come to light in the aftermath of this dramatic revelation? The night was far from over, and I had a feeling that the biggest surprises were yet to come. The gala had devolved into chaos. Guests whispered among themselves, shooting furtive glances at Madison, Jake, Alexander, and me. The once pleasant atmosphere of charity and goodwill had been replaced by a thick tension that seemed to suffocate the room. I watched my son's face carefully, my heart aching as I saw the myriad emotions flickering across his features: disbelief, confusion, anger, and deep, gut-wrenching pain. Alexander had always worn his heart on his sleeve, so unlike his mother and me. In that moment, I was torn between the desire to shield him from this harsh reality and the knowledge that he needed to face it. "Alexander," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in private." He shrugged off my hand, his eyes never leaving Madison. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to hear what she has to say. Right here, right now." Madison, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, looked frantically between Alexander and me. "Alex, please," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. "It's not what you think. Jake he's just an old friend. He's been going through a tough time, and I was trying to help him by sneaking him into our engagement party." Alexander's voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor of hurt beneath it. "By having secret conversations with him. Tell me, Madison, what exactly am I misunderstanding here?" I noticed Rosa hovering nearby, her face a mask of concern, and was that guilt? She seemed to be wrestling with some internal conflict, her hands twisting her apron nervously. Jake, who had been quietly trying to edge towards the exit, suddenly spoke up. "Look, man, don't blame Madison. This was all my idea. I took advantage of our old friendship. She was just trying to be kind." I couldn't help but admire the man's audacity. Even now, he was trying to spin a narrative, to salvage something from this disaster. But Alexander wasn't buying it. "Kind?" he spat, his composure finally breaking. "Is that what you call lying to me for months, planning God knows what behind my back?" He turned to Madison, his voice cracking. "I trusted you, I loved you. Was any of it real?" Madison's eyes filled with tears. Whether they were genuine or another performance, I couldn't tell. "Of course it was real, Alex. I love you. Yes, I made mistakes. I should have been honest about Jake, about my past. But my feelings for you are true." As she spoke, I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. Rosa had taken a step forward, her face set in determination. Whatever internal battle she had been fighting, it seemed she had finally made a decision. "Mr. Alexander," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "there's something you need to know." All eyes turned to Rosa. In that moment, she seemed to stand taller, the weight of her secret visibly lifting from her shoulders. "I made a promise to keep quiet," she continued, "but I can't stand by and watch this happen. Madison isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Emily Lawson. I knew her mother years ago before—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Before she passed away." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Madison, or Emily, stumbled back as if physically struck. How do you know that?" she whispered. Rosa's eyes were full of a mixture of pity and resolve. "Your mother made me promise to look out for you if anything happened to her. I've been watching you all this time, hoping you would make the right choice on your own." Alexander looked shell-shocked, his gaze darting between Madison and Rosa. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Have you been lying about everything? Even your name?" Madison's composure crumbled entirely. She sank into a nearby chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted a better life. I wanted to escape my past." The gala guests, sensing the deeply personal nature of the unfolding drama, began to discreetly make their exits. Soon only our family, Madison, Jake, and a few close friends remained. I stepped forward, my mind reeling from these revelations. "I think," I said carefully, "that we all need to take a moment to process this. Alexander, son, why don't you and I—" But Alexander cut me off, his voice cold. "No, Dad, I don't need a moment. I need the truth. All of it." He turned to Madison, his expression hardening. "Start talking from the beginning, and this time don't leave anything out." Madison looked up, her makeup streaked with tears, her carefully crafted image of perfection utterly shattered. She took a deep, shuddering breath and began to speak. "My real name is Emily Lawson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My mother, she worked so hard to give me a good life, but we never had much. When she got sick, I didn't know what to do. I met Jake at a low point in my life. He promised me a way out, a chance at a better life." As Madison, Emily, continued her story, I watched my son's face. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now with something else. Understanding? Pity? It was too early to tell. What was clear, however, was that this night had changed everything. The foundations of trust had been shaken, secrets had been exposed, and the future that had seemed so certain just hours ago was now shrouded in uncertainty. As Emily's tale unfolded, I couldn't help but wonder, in a world built on lies, where did the truth truly lie? And more importantly, where do we go from here? The opulent ballroom, which hours earlier had buzzed with the energy of Newport's elite, now felt cavernous and cold. The handful of remaining guests stood frozen, bearing witness to the unraveling of what we had all believed was a fairy tale romance. At the center of it all sat Madison, no, Emily, her designer gown a stark contrast to the vulnerability etched across her face. "After my mother, after she was gone," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was lost. I had no family, no money, no real prospects. That's when I met Jake." She glanced at the man who now stood awkwardly to the side, looking as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "He showed me how to reinvent myself, how to become someone people would admire, even envy. It started small, little white lies about my background, my education. But it snowballed. I watched Alexander as he listened, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. My son, always so quick to see the best in people, was now grappling with the harsh reality of deception. Part of me ached to shield him from this pain, but I knew that these were lessons he needed to learn. The social media influence, the modeling contracts, it was all carefully orchestrated, Emily admitted. Jake taught me how to build a brand, how to make people believe in the persona we created. Madison Taylor was everything I wished I could be, confident, successful, born into privilege. I never meant to fall in love, Alex. That wasn't part of the plan. Alexander, who had been silent throughout her confession, finally spoke. Was any of it real? He asked, his voice hoarse. Any part of us? Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. Yes, she whispered. God, yes. Falling in love with you was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. It's why I've been trying to distance myself from Jake, from our old schemes. I wanted to be worthy of you, of your family. I couldn't help but notice the flash of surprise, and was that hope in Alexander's eyes. Despite everything, it was clear that his feelings for her hadn't simply vanished. Love, I mused, was indeed a complex and resilient thing. Mr. Montgomery, Emily said, turning to me with a pleading look, I know I've done unforgivable things. I've lied, I've schemed, I've betrayed your trust. But please believe me when I say that my love for Alexander is real. I'll do anything to make this right. As I pondered her words, Rosa stepped forward. If I may, she said softly, I've watched Emily. Yes, I knew her as Emily, grow up from afar. Her mother was a good woman who fell on hard times. Before she passed, she made me promise to keep an eye on her daughter. I've failed in my promise by staying silent for so long, but I can vouch for the love I've seen between her and Alexander. It's genuine. The room fell silent as we all absorbed this new information. I found myself in an impossible position. On one hand, this young woman had lied her way into our lives, potentially putting my son's heart and our family's reputation at risk. On the other hand, the pain and remorse in her eyes seemed genuine, and if Rosa vouched for her... Dad? Alexander's voice broke through my thoughts. What do you think we should do? I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. I think, I began, that we've all had quite a shock tonight. Emotions are running high and decisions made in the heat of the moment are rarely wise ones. I turned to Emily. You've given us a lot to process. While I appreciate your honesty now, it doesn't erase the months of deception. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. Emily nodded, her shoulders slumping in resignation. However, I continued, surprised by my own words, I also believe in second chances, not blindly given but earned through actions and genuine effort. Alexander's eyes widened in surprise. Dad, are you saying... I held up a hand. I'm saying that we all need time. Time to think, to process, and to decide our next steps. Emily, I turned to her, my tone firm but not unkind. I think it would be best if you stayed elsewhere for now. Take some time to reflect on who you really are and what you truly want. Not what Jake or anyone else has told you to be, but who Emily Lawson is at her core. Emily nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension on her face. I understand. Thank you for not immediately throwing me out. As Rosa led Emily away to gather her things, I turned to Jake. As for you, I think it's best you leave now. I won't press charges for trespassing, but if I ever see you near my family again, I won't be so lenient. Jake, looking decidedly less confident than he had earlier in the evening, simply nodded and slunk away. Left alone with Alexander, I placed a hand on his shoulder. Son, I know this is a lot to take in. How are you holding up? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his eyes troubled. I don't know, Dad. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I still love her. Is that crazy? After everything she's done? I squeezed his shoulder gently. Love rarely makes sense, Alexander. What matters now is what you do with these feelings. Take some time. Think about what you want and what you're willing to forgive. Remember, it's okay to love someone and still hold them accountable for their actions. As we stood there, father and son, in the empty ballroom, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with difficult conversations and hard decisions. But as I looked at my son, I saw not just the pain of betrayal, but also the strength that comes from facing hard truths. Whatever the future held, I knew that we would face it together, as a family. The night's revelations had shaken us to our core, but perhaps, just perhaps, from this chaos could come growth, understanding, and eventually, healing. The days following the gala passed in a haze of tense silence and furtive glances. Our sprawling Newport mansion, usually a hub of activity and laughter, now felt oppressively quiet. Alexander had retreated into himself, spending most of his time locked away in his study or taking long, solitary walks along the beach. I found myself standing in my own study more often than not, gazing out at the manicured gardens that seemed to mock the chaos of our lives with their perfect order. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on my shoulders. Had I done the right thing? Should I have been more forceful in separating Alexander from Emily? Or was allowing them time and space to process everything the wiser path? My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I called, turning to see Rosa enter, a tray of tea in her hands. "I thought you might need this, Mr. Montgomery," she said, setting the tray down on my desk. As she arranged the cups, I noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Rosa," I said gently, "I think it's time we had a talk, don't you?" She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. "Yes, sir. I owe you an explanation." I gestured for her to sit, pouring us both a cup of tea. "Tell me about Emily's mother," I prompted. "How did you know her?" Rosa's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "Maria Lawson was my best friend in high school," she began. "We grew up together in a small town in Ohio. Life wasn't easy for either of us, but Maria, she had dreams. Big dreams. She was going to become a lawyer, make something of herself." I listened intently as Rosa unfolded a tale of friendship, hardship, and promises made. Maria had fallen in love young, gotten pregnant with Emily, and watched her dreams slip away. Her boyfriend had abandoned them, leaving Maria to raise Emily alone. "When Maria fell ill," Rosa continued, her voice thick with emotion, "she made me promise to look out for Emily. I was already working here for your family, and I didn't know how to fulfill that promise. So I watched from afar, sent money when I could, but it never felt like enough. The pieces were starting to fall into place. And when Emily showed up here as Madison," Rosa nodded, "I was shocked. I almost didn't recognize her at first. But then I saw Maria's eyes looking back at me, and I knew I should have said something then, Mr. Montgomery. I'm so sorry." I reached out, patting her hand gently. "You were caught between two promises, Rosa. I understand that. But tell me, what do you really think of Emily, beyond your obligation to her mother?" Rosa's face softened. "She's a good girl at heart, Mr. Montgomery. Lost, misguided perhaps, but not malicious. The love I've seen between her and Alexander, it's real. Of that I'm certain." As Rosa excused herself, leaving me alone with my thoughts, I found my perspective shifting. Emily's actions were still deeply troubling, but the context Rosa provided painted a more nuanced picture. A young woman, alone in the world, grasping at a chance for a better life. Misguided, yes, but perhaps not beyond redemption. My contemplation was interrupted by the sound of Alexander's voice, raised in anger. Concerned, I made my way to the foyer, where I found him engaged in a heated conversation on his phone. "I don't care what you think you're entitled to, Jake," Alexander was saying, his free hand clenched into a fist. "Stay away from her and stay away from my family. This is your last warning." As he ended the call, Alexander noticed me standing there. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a weariness that made him look far older than his years. "Jake?" I questioned, though I already knew the answer. Alexander nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "He's been trying to contact Emily, threatening to reveal more about her past unless she helps him one last time." He looked at me, a mixture of determination and uncertainty in his eyes. "Dad, I think I need to see her, to talk to her. There's so much I still don't understand." I studied my son's face, seeing in it a reflection of my own turmoil. The hurt was still there, the betrayal raw, but beneath it all was a resilience I hadn't fully appreciated before. In that moment, I saw not just my son, but a man coming into his own, facing a crucible that would define him. "I think that's a wise decision, son," I said carefully. "But remember, seeking understanding doesn't mean you have to forgive or forget. Be careful with your heart." Alexander nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I will, Dad, and thank you for not just telling me what to do, for letting me figure this out." As I watched him leave, presumably to arrange a meeting with Emily, I felt a strange mixture of pride and apprehension. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls, but I also saw the possibility for growth, for a deeper understanding not just between Alexander and Emily, but within our family as a whole. My phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made my blood run cold. "Mr. Montgomery, we need to talk. There's more to this story than you know. Jake." I stared at the message, my mind racing. What more could there possibly be? And more importantly, how would this new development affect Alexander and Emily's fragile reconciliation? As the sun began to set over Newport, casting long shadows across the grounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of yet another revelation, one that could either heal the rifts between us or tear us apart for good. The tension in the air was palpable as I paced the length of my study. Alexander had left to meet Emily, and I found myself torn between the desire to protect my son and the recognition that he needed to face this on his own. The message from Jake weighed heavily on my mind, a ticking time bomb of unknown consequences. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the front door open. Alexander's footsteps echoed through the hallway, stopping outside my study. He knocked softly before entering, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. "How did it go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Alexander sank into a chair, exhaling deeply. "It was intense, Dad. Emily told me everything. About her childhood, her mother's illness, meeting Jake. She didn't hold anything back this time." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "She's not the person I thought I was in love with," Alexander said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I'm starting to see that the real Emily might be someone even more worthy of love. She's flawed, she's made mistakes, but she's also incredibly strong and resilient." Pride swelled in my chest at my son's maturity. "And what do you want to do now?" Alexander met my gaze, determination in his eyes. "I want to give her a chance, Dad. Not to pick up where we left off, but to start over, to get to know the real Emily." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed insistently. It was Jake again. Reluctantly, I answered, putting the call on speaker. "Mr. Montgomery," Jake's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but there's something you need to know. It's about Emily's mother." Alexander and I exchanged glances, both leaning in to listen. Jake continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Maria Lawson didn't die from an illness. She took her own life. The medical bills, the debt, it was too much. Emily doesn't know. I found out when I was digging into her past, but I never told her. I used it to manipulate her, to keep her under my control. I'm not proud of it, but you deserve to know the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's face had gone pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Why are you telling us this now?" I demanded. Jake's sigh crackled through the speaker. "Because I'm done with all of it. The cons, the lies, seeing how much Emily cares for your son. It made me realize how far I've fallen. I'm turning myself in to the authorities. I thought Emily deserved to know the truth about her mother, but I'm too much of a coward to tell her myself." After Jake hung up, Alexander and I sat in stunned silence. The revelation about Emily's mother added yet another layer of complexity to an already tangled situation. "We have to tell her," Alexander said finally, his voice firm. "She deserves to know." I nodded in agreement. "But it needs to come from someone who cares about her, someone who can support her through this." Alexander stood, determination etched on his face. "I'll do it. I'll tell her." As I watched my son leave to face perhaps the most difficult conversation of his life, I felt a mixture of pride and trepidation. The road ahead would not be easy, but I could see the strength in Alexander that would carry him through. Hours later, as the sun began to set over Newport, casting a golden glow across the gardens, I found myself on the terrace. The sound of approaching footsteps made me turn. Alexander and Emily were walking towards me, hand in hand. Emily's eyes were red-rimmed, evidence of recent tears, but there was a peace in her expression that I hadn't seen before. "Mr. Montgomery," Emily said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes, "I want to thank you for giving me a chance, for not turning me away when you had every right to. I studied her face, seeing not the polished facade of Madison Taylor, but the raw, genuine Emily Lawson. We've all made mistakes, Emily. What matters is how we choose to move forward. Alexander squeezed her hand supportively. We've talked, Dad, about everything, and we've decided we want to start over, to build something real based on honesty and trust. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. And what does that look like? Emily straightened, a newfound confidence in her posture. I want to go back to school, to become the lawyer my mother always dreamed of being, to make a difference in the lives of people who are struggling like we did. And I want to help, Alexander added. Not with money, but by using our family's connections to set up scholarships, to create opportunities for people who need a second chance. As I listened to their plans, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of deception and heartache, but standing here now, I could see the potential for growth, for redemption, for a love deeper and more genuine than anything that had come before. I think, I said slowly, that sounds like a wonderful idea. Both of you have been through a crucible and you've emerged stronger for it. Whatever challenges lie ahead, face them together with honesty and compassion. As the three of us stood there watching the sun sink below the horizon, I realized that this was not an ending, but a beginning. A chance for all of us, Alexander, Emily, and myself, to redefine what family means. To build connections based on truth and understanding rather than expectations and appearances. The path forward would not be easy. There would be difficult conversations, moments of doubt and obstacles to overcome. But as I looked at Alexander and Emily, their hands intertwined and their faces turned towards the future, I felt a sense of hope. In the end, it wasn't about the lies that had brought us to this point, but about the truths we chose to embrace moving forward. And in that truth, in that vulnerability, we had found something far more valuable than any fortune or social status. We had found authenticity, resilience, and the power of second chances. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the Newport estate, I knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, we would face them together, as a family renewed, stronger for having been broken, and infinitely more real.